Kiriath swore and lunged at him. Brief, impotent rattle of chains and a chorus of protests as the move dragged at the other men where they sat. The gaunt man grappled Kiriath back, held the fat man's twitching hands a few inches off Jerin's face until Kiriath gave it up and slumped down again. "Sit quiet, you fucking twat," the gaunt man hissed. "You want a marchmaster on us? Want to end up like Barad?" Jerin's gaze switched involuntarily to the set of wrenched and empty manacles they still carried with them on the coffle. Big, tough Barad, a harbour-end pimp by trade, had come to the auction block the same way as Jerin, through the criminal courts. In the pimp's case, it was some business about cutting up the wrong slumming noble when he got rough with one of the girls. Said noble turns out to have Glades connections. The watch get off their lazy, drink-sodden arses for a change and ask some questions, break some uncooperative heads. Someone talks. Barad lands in jail long enough to spit in his accuser's upriver face rather than cringe. Ends up on the coffle as a result. Standard stuff. That same old city song. Barad the pimp brought with him an arrogant dislike for the debt slaves he found himself chained to, and he spent the first 3 days of the march taunting them to explosions of ill-judged violence, which he then slapped down with practiced thug ease and a sneer. For some reason he'd left Jerin mostly alone, but the coffle chains were generous enough that he got to lay hands on at least 4 or 5 other men, before the march masters grew tired of the spectacle as sport and started instead to resent the chaos it caused. On the 3rd day, the 5th or 6th outbreak of brawling, 2 or 3 of the caravan's mounted overseers and owners rode back down the line to see what all the fuss was about. One of them was a woman, and when the march masters had kicked and cursed the coffle back into order, she beckoned their chief over, leaned down in her saddle to talk to him, and sent him back to his colleagues, flushed dark with chagrin. Jerin never heard what was said, but he knew what was coming the same way he'd know a change in the wind off the marsh. He chose not to share the knowledge with Barad, and the pimp was apparently too slum-stupid or iron-headed to work it out for himself. He started another fight that same afternoon. The march masters took him at midday latrine stop the following noon, just across the river from Parashal. 4 of them at once, grim, leather-faced men with long wooden clubs in hand and eyes that glinted like mica. They held him down and opened the manacles with the bolt cutters they all carried at their belts like weapons. It was an act whose irrevocability turned the pimp to snorting and kicking like a terrified horse when he saw it. But by then, of course, it was far too late. They dragged Barad, thrashing and roaring, into a nearby copse, and there they took their time, beating him to death. It was close enough for the sounds to carry, solid, meaty thwacks like a butcher chopping joints apart. High, awful shrieks that very shortly broke down into pleading and gurgling moans, finally a silence that was worse than either, as the sounds of the beating went on. Jerin had seen more than his fair share of brutality, out on the marsh and in the streets of Trelane both, but even for him the killing seemed to take forever. Elsewhere on the coffle, less hardened men, and these included earlier victims of Barad's thuggish bullying, bowed their heads and stared at the ground they sat upon. 1 or 2 crammed fingers to their mouths like women and choked back vomit. Jerin made it halfway to a sneering disdain before he realized he, too, was trembling with reaction. Or, he told himself a little giddily, just coming down with Tyger's Hoyran-cursed fucking cold. Presently the noises stopped and the march masters emerged from the trees, trading guffaws, grinning like well-fed wolves. They carried their clubs at rakish shoulder arms. One of them swung his manacle cutters idly to and fro in the other hand, slashing at the knee-high grass. The implement's pincer end was dipped with blood, bright where the midday sun caught it as it swung. And later, the unspoken knowledge settled among the silent captives, also grinning, like some new, skull-headed companion on the coffle, the understanding that it could have been any one of them in Barad's place. "Yeah, and speaking of that," Jerin told them grimly, when Kiriath had quieted under the gaunt man's admonition, "you think that's the only empty set of cuffs you're going to see on this chain? Every day we don't make the market in Helteth is coins dripping through these fucks' fingers. You think they'll stop or slow down for anyone who can't hack the heat once we start across the scrub?" "I have to sell